March 2nd, 2:50 p.m. Eastern, Henryville, Indiana. A routine Friday afternoon detonated into total chaos in less time than it takes to boil water. Winds hit 175 miles per hour. An 800-yard-wide wedge tornado carved through the heart of a small town, erasing homes down to bare concrete slabs and ripping 10,000-pound chunks of asphalt straight off the highway. In 49 miles of continuous destruction, 11 people lost their lives. But the nightmare didn't end when the first funnel lifted. Shortly after the initial storm passed, additional severe weather and trailing rotation disrupted early rescue efforts. 2 tornadoes. Same town, same route, 15 minutes apart. How does a community survive nature hitting the same target twice? The morning started like any other early March Friday in southern Indiana. Kids sat in classrooms at Henryville High School. Families planned weekend errands. The cafeteria at Boudreaux's family restaurant served lunch specials to regulars who'd been coming for decades. Weather warnings were background noise in Tornado Alley. People had heard sirens dozens of times before and watched storms dissolve into rain. Across the region, an atmospheric storm system was already intensifying. Unseasonably warm, moisture-laden air from the Gulf of Mexico slammed head-on into a violent Arctic cold front, locking a rotating supercell directly over southern Indiana. The temperature differential was extreme. Dew points in the Gulf air pushed into the mid-60s while Arctic air sat in the upper 20s. That 40-degree contrast created instability that supercharged every updraft. Wind shear twisted the columns into tight rotation. The jet stream carved a highway straight through the region, guiding the supercell like a missile on rails. Meteorologists at the National Weather Service office in Louisville watched radar returns that shouldn't have been possible. The colors on their screens pushed past red into purple. The hook echo was textbook. A wedge was forming. Velocity couplets showed rotation at over 120 knots. The debris ball signature appeared before the tornado even touched down, meaning the vortex was so violent it was lofting enormous objects before it made ground contact. And it was aimed straight at Henryville. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk that morning, upgraded to a high risk by noon. Tornado watches blanketed Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. While early spring can bring turbulent weather, major tornado outbreaks in early March are relatively rare. Henryville had seen them 100 times. This one was different. The models showed a discrete supercell with a lifespan measured in hours, not minutes. A tornado factory locked on a single track. At 2:30 p.m. on March 2nd, 2012, former Henryville High School principal Troy Albert got a call. The district superintendent was on the line, voice urgent. A tornado was bearing down on the school complex. They had 30 minutes, maybe less. Albert stared out the window at skies that were turning green. The air pressure had dropped. His ears popped. He could feel it in his chest. The school complex housed 3 buildings: elementary, middle, and high school, all on the same campus. 1,300 students total. The gym had a storm shelter rated for 200 people. The basement offices could hold maybe 50 more. That left over 1,000 kids with nowhere to go if the building took a direct hit. The walls were brick and mortar, strong against rain and hail, useless against an EF4 wedge. Albert made the call that would define the rest of his life. Early dismissal. Immediate evacuation. 1,300 students across the elementary, middle, and high school campuses flooded into buses and cars at 2:45 p.m., racing to get home before the storm arrived. It was the decision every principal dreads. Keep them inside and hope the building holds, or send them out and pray they make it. Albert chose speed. The buses rolled out. Angel Perry was halfway through her route driving bus 211 when she saw it. A dark funnel cloud, wide and low, churning across the fields directly toward her. It wasn't a rope. It wasn't a cone. It was a wedge, wider than it was tall, covering half the horizon. The base was wrapped in debris, a rotating wall of dirt and wood and metal spinning at speeds that blurred individual objects into a single gray mass. She didn't hesitate, turned the bus around, hard. The tires screamed as she cranked the wheel, pulling a 180-degree turn on a 2-lane road with trees on both sides. Told her 11 students to grab their textbooks and hold them over their heads. Their eyes were wide. Some were crying. She kept her voice calm, firm. "We're going back to the school. Stay low. Cover your heads. Do exactly what I say." Drove back to the school at full speed, tires screaming. The bus shook. The wind was already picking up, pushing the vehicle sideways on straightaways. She gripped the wheel with both hands and pushed the accelerator to the floor, pulled into the parking lot, threw open the doors, and ran those kids inside into an interior office shelter. Counted them off one by one. 11 students. Safe. She looked at her watch. 90 seconds to spare. Moments later, the tornado hit. It picked up her empty 33,000-pound school bus like it was made of cardboard. The tornado touched down in Fredericksburg, Indiana at 2:50 p.m. Eastern, reaching Henryville roughly 15 to 20 minutes later. By the time it crossed into Clark County, the wedge was at full strength. It struck the school complex around 3:05 p.m., devastating the campus shortly after evacuation. The vortex was so wide it engulfed the entire campus simultaneously, lifted it, spun it, threw it 300 yards down a hill. The bus flew through the air, end over end, tumbling like a toy, and crashed directly through the front window of Budrow's family restaurant. Inside the diner, owner Sherman Sykes had just finished herding 8 customers and employees into shelter. They heard the roar, felt the building shudder, and then a yellow school bus was sitting in the middle of the dining room where people had been eating lunch 5 minutes earlier. Glass everywhere, twisted metal, the smell of gas. The bus had come through the front wall at an angle, taking out the support beam and half the ceiling. The front axle was embedded in the floor. The windshield had shattered, scattering safety glass across every surface. One of the side mirrors was lodged in the wall 10 feet away. But all 8 people walked out alive. Because Sykes moved fast. Because Perry turned around. Because 90 seconds made the difference between survival and catastrophe. Back at the school, the main gym was gone. Completely erased. Walls collapsed inward. Roof ripped clean off. The steel I-beams that held up the structure were twisted into spirals. The basketball hoops were gone. The bleachers were scattered across 3 counties. Debris scattered across what used to be a parking lot. The band room had been sheared off at the foundation. Instruments were found miles away, battered and unrecognizable. The cafeteria was open to the sky. Kitchen equipment, ovens, refrigerators, all of it sucked out and deposited in fields a quarter-mile east. If those 1,300 students had still been inside, the death toll would have been unthinkable. But they weren't. They were home, or in basements, or pulled over on back roads, sheltering in ditches. The early dismissal worked. Barely. By seconds and inches, it worked. Then the second tornado hit. Shortly after the storm entered Trimble County, Kentucky. Same path, same town. Meteorologists call it a cyclic supercell. The parent storm didn't die. It recycled. The mesocyclone tightened, tilted, and spawned another tornado from the same updraft that produced the first. It started as an EF1, winds around 100 miles per hour, tearing shingles and snapping trees. Then it strengthened into an EF3 as it tore east, winds reaching 140 miles per hour. The school's second gym, still standing after the first strike, collapsed under the second. The walls buckled inward. The roof folded like paper. What had been damaged was now obliterated. Homes that had been damaged were now reduced to bare slabs. Families that had just climbed out of their basements were thrown back into survival mode. 2 separate tornadoes, minutes apart, carving the same scar across the same community. The odds of that are extreme. The result was devastation layered on top of devastation. Rescue crews arriving on scene after the first tornado were forced to take cover as the second one roared through. Ambulances pulled over. Firefighters dove into ditches. The secondary strike delayed emergency response by over an hour, leaving critically injured victims trapped in rubble with no way to call for help. 3 miles south of the school, 62-year-old Wayne Hunter huddled in a hallway with his wife, Lenora, retired nurse, military veteran, a man who'd spent his life taking care of others. He served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era, came home and worked at Clark Memorial Hospital for 30 years, delivered care to thousands of patients, saved lives in emergency rooms and ICUs. When the walls started to shake, he wrapped himself around her and said, "I love you." The house came down on top of them. Lenora survived. Wayne didn't. He absorbed the full impact of the collapse, using his body as a shield. The roof beam that would have crushed her skull hit his back instead. The wall that would have pinned her chest landed on his shoulders. When rescuers pulled her from the wreckage hours later, she was alive because he made the choice to take the hit. She was bruised, covered in dust, disoriented, but breathing. Wayne was found still holding her, arms locked around her torso, his body positioned between her and the debris. He was among the tragic fatalities in Clark County. One of the lives lost in the Henryville area who didn't make it out. One life traded for another in the span of seconds. In Marysville, just outside Henryville, 36-year-old mother Stephanie Decker covered her 2 children with her body as their home disintegrated around them. Dominic, 8 years old. Reese, 5. She felt the walls buckle, heard the roar. The sound wasn't like a freight train. It was deeper. A grinding, tearing sound that vibrated through the foundation. Shifted her weight to block falling bricks. The debris crushed her legs, both of them. The first impact was the door frame, pinning her right leg at the knee. The second was a support beam, landing across both shins. The pain was instant and blinding. She couldn't move, couldn't pull free, but she could still cover her kids. She spread her arms wider, creating a pocket of space beneath her torso. Dominic was crying. Reese was screaming. She told them to close their eyes, to stay still, to stay with her. The house collapsed in stages. First the roof, then the walls, then the second floor. By the time the wind stopped, she was buried under 3 feet of rubble. Severe crush injuries. When they pulled her out, she was conscious, asking if her kids were okay. They were. Not a scratch. She lost one leg above the knee and the other below the knee. Saved her children. That was the trade she made without hesitation. The injuries resulted in immediate double amputation. Surgeons worked for hours to stabilize her. She spent weeks in the ICU, months in rehab. But Dominic and Reese walked out of the hospital the same day, physically unharmed, because their mother turned herself into a shield. Not everyone had time to make that choice. In nearby New Pekin, the Babcock family took shelter as the tornado closed in. 5 members of the family lost their lives, including 15-month-old Angel Babcock. The baby was blown into an open field, found alive by rescuers, and rushed to the hospital. She survived 2 days. Then she was gone. The youngest victim of a storm that gave no warning and took no prisoners. Her parents, grandparents, and great-grandmother all perished in the same collapse. The house was swept clean off its foundation. Investigators found the concrete slab bare, with debris scattered in every direction. The family had taken shelter in an interior bathroom, the standard protocol, but the structure had no anchor bolts. The walls weren't secured to the foundation. When the winds hit, the entire house lifted as a single unit and disintegrated mid-air. Angel was found 100 yards away, still breathing, covered in mud and scratches but alive. Doctors stabilized her. She fought for 48 hours. Then her injuries proved too severe. She died at Cosair Children's Hospital in Louisville on March 4th, surrounded by surviving family members. She was among the tragic fatalities attributed to the March 2nd tornado outbreak. Across southern Indiana, the destruction was surgical. The tornado didn't wander. It targeted. Foundations swept clean. Asphalt torn from State Road 135 in huge slabs weighing 10,000 pounds each, thrown into adjacent fields like they were made of foam. The highway damage occurred near Palmyra, where the tornado crossed the road at peak intensity. Witnesses described the asphalt peeling away in sheets, flipping end over end, landing in cornfields 200 yards away. That level of ground scouring is rare. Asphalt is heavy, layered, and bonded to compacted gravel and soil. Removing it requires sustained winds exceeding 170 miles per hour focused directly at ground level. Cars wrapped around trees. Entire neighborhoods reduced to kindling. For years, storm chasers and meteorologists debated whether this was actually an EF5. The damage indicators were there. Swept slabs, asphalt scouring, vehicles thrown a quarter mile. A 2022 National Weather Service retrospective study revisited the damage survey and concluded that some of the most extreme destruction could have been caused by winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. But the official rating stayed at high-end EF4, with peak winds estimated at 175 miles per hour. Later surveys revealed that some of the swept foundations lacked proper anchor bolts. Poor construction, not maximum wind speeds. Homes built in the 1970s and 1980s without modern building codes. Walls that weren't bolted to slabs. Roofs that weren't strapped to walls. The debate continues. but the rating stands. The Henryville tornado remains officially classified as a high-end EF4, the most recent tornado of that intensity to strike Indiana. When the winds finally died, Henryville looked like a war zone. Half the town was gone. Streets were unrecognizable. Power lines down everywhere. Gas leaks hissing. Communication networks dead. Cell towers were destroyed. Landlines were severed. Emergency responders from across Indiana poured in, but the roads were blocked with debris. Trees across every intersection. Power poles snapped at the base. Roofs in the middle of the street. Families trapped in basements with no way to call for help. Hospitals in nearby Scottsburg and Louisville overwhelmed with critical injuries. The entire region became a vast search and rescue operation. Indiana National Guard units deployed within hours. FEMA declared Clark County a federal disaster area. Red Cross shelters opened in Salem and Charlestown. And while crews worked through the wreckage, the quiet horror of secondary hazards began to emerge. Fungal infections from disturbed soil entering open wounds. Toxic dust in the air. Fires breaking out with no water pressure to fight them. Gas line ruptures igniting piles of debris. The tornado kept claiming victims long after the sky cleared. 14 years later, Henryville has rebuilt. New homes stand where ruins once lay. The school complex was reconstructed with reinforced walls and dedicated storm shelters. Memorial parks honor the 11 lives lost along the tornado's 49-mile path, but the scars remain. Not just in the terrain, but in the decisions that defined that day. Principal Troy Albert, who later led Salem High School, used the lessons of Henryville to advocate for dedicated storm shelter safe rooms during campus renovations. The first school in Indiana with 3 shelters, each one built to FEMA safe room standards to withstand 250 MPF winds. Each one positioned to provide coverage for every wing of the building. Each one stocked with emergency supplies, medical kits, and communication equipment. Because he knows what 90 seconds means. Because he watched hundreds of students evacuate into the teeth of a monster and somehow survive. Because he understands that the next tornado won't wait for a better plan. Angel Perry's empty bus still sits as a rusted monument to the impossible. A 33,000-pound vehicle thrown 300 yards through the air, landing in a diner where 9 people should have died but didn't. Because a bus driver made the decision to turn around. Because a restaurant owner moved fast. Because 90 seconds separated tragedy from miracle. The bus was eventually removed from the restaurant and placed on display near the rebuilt school as a reminder. Kids walk past it every day. A twisted, mangled school bus that flew through the air and became a symbol of survival. The Henryville tornado remains the most recent EF4 to strike Indiana. It carved a 49-mile scar across the region in 49 minutes of relentless fury, followed by a second strike that defied probability. 2 tornadoes. Same path. 15 minutes apart. 11 lives lost. Hundreds saved by split-second decisions made by ordinary people who refused to freeze. Wayne Hunter shielding his wife. Stephanie Decker covering her children. Angel Perry rushing her students to safety. Sherman Sykes herding strangers into a hallway. These weren't trained professionals. They were everyday citizens, parents, and community members. They didn't have plans or protocols. They had seconds. And they chose to stand between death and the people they loved. Tornadoes erase buildings. They rip apart infrastructure. They rewrite towns in minutes. But they can't erase the choices people make when the walls start to fall. Henryville survived because when the sky turned black and the sirens screamed, people ran toward danger instead of away from it. They held doors. They covered bodies. They turned buses around. And in those 2 minutes between decision and impact, they proved that courage doesn't need time to think. It just needs a reason to act. The storm lasted 49 minutes. The rebuilding took years. But the legacy of March 2nd, 2012, isn't measured in wind speed or path length. It's measured in the 11 students who made it off bus 211 alive. In the 9 people who walked out of Boudreaux's restaurant past a school bus that shouldn't have been there. In 2 children who grew up without their mother's legs but with her life. In a wife who survived because her husband made himself the target. Henryville survived the worst nature could throw at it twice in 15 minutes. And it's still standing. Not because the buildings were strong, because the people were.